Hey, comic book fans, Pete here from Comic Books Transformed. And today we're going to talk about a show that just premiered on HBO Max, a show that everyone is talking about, The Last of Us. Now, Brian, I think there actually is a Last of Us comic, right?
Yeah, I think there is a comic. I think I looked that up as I like to adhere to our general rule of something being in a comic book form at some point.
Yeah. And I think that it was like Dark Horse or somebody published it, but a lot of times nowadays, Dark Horse and maybe I don't know, Image or Boom, some of the established comic book companies will adapt video games. I know there's even like an Avatar comic that Dark Horse put out recently.
It is Dark Horse, by the way.
What's up?
It is Dark Horse, by the way.
Yeah. So they grab licenses whenever they can, and so Brian and I, obviously, if you're new to the channel, we cover adaptations of comic books into streaming shows and movies. And this time around, we just want to talk about The Last of Us, just because you're like such a big fan of the game, right, Brian?
I'm a big fan of the game. Although I have a lot to say about the show so far.
Okay. I haven't written notes, so usually I'm pretty good at writing down the names and the people behind the scenes and stuff. But I'm going to be a little sloppy this time around. My main thing that I want to talk to you about was how similar is this to the game narrative-wise so far?
Very. So they obviously are adding a bit here. The first episode clocked in about an hour and 20 minutes or so, and
Yeah.
that covers approximately the first 30 or 40 minutes of the game. So like the intro, in the past, you actually play as Joel's daughter Sarah in the intro to learn the control, which is kind of cool. And that gets fleshed out a bit more, because I think we got about 40 minutes, 30 or 40 minutes of that.
Okay.
And that's about 15 minutes of the game. And then the other than that, you're essentially the flash forward is relatively the same. You still have Tess, you still have Ellie and Marlena at the Fireflies. I think the only major difference really was that Joel was not actively wanting to look for Tommy. They had like a falling out, and he didn't want anything to do with them. Or Tommy didn't want anything to do with Joel, I believe.
Okay.
That's really the only major difference I've noticed so far, other than they've fleshed out the general setting a little more in that quarantine zone, and even what life was before the outbreak.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So first off, you answered a couple of my questions there, and isn't it? It's Marlene, right? Is the name of that woman? Yeah. And then the actress that played Marlene.
Marlene is the leader of the Fireflies, the terrorist organization. The woman that Joel's living with, Tess, who is played by Anna Torv. That I just want to make sure that we're distinguishing them properly.
Yeah. Well, because what's cool about HBO Max is that they have these little vignettes after the show sometimes where they talk about the show and that specific episode. And I watched that for The Last of Us, and the actress that played Marlene said that she auditioned for Marlene when the game was going to come out in I think 2013.
2013, yeah, it was the original game.
And she said that I think she said that she didn't get the part, and so that she's sort of aged up and has become Marlene on the show. And I just thought that was such a cool thing. I've never heard of that before.
She does look very much like the character.
Okay.
I will say that. Tess looks a little different. I mean, Joel looks pretty spot on, even though Pedro Pascal is. Joel was white. He was a good old Southern boy, and all that. But otherwise, he looks pretty spot on. Ellie looks spot on too, honestly. Although I guess ultimately that early in the PS3 days when this this had to be PS3. There were two games that came out on PlayStation where there were characters that were heavily looked like Elliot Page, or at the time Ellen Page.
Right.
And this was one of them. Ellie was one of them. If you looked at the game, you that's Ellen Page or Elliot Page now.
Right.
So it still looks very close to what it does in the game.
Right. So they didn't use Elliot Page to play that character? They didn't use
No. The original voice actors, Joel was Troy Baker, and Ellie was Ashley Johnson. They're both done a lot of video game and anime work.
Yeah. So talking about the video game, I went and hung out with my friend Colin over the weekend, and Colin was telling me just how awesome the game is. And the game seems to have like a real devoted following. He was saying that what works so well with the game is just this sort of like this sense of like kind of misery and darkness and how rough it is for the characters. Would you say that's the main appeal for you, like the world itself?
So before I didn't exactly answer your question about me being a big fan of the game. I do really like this game a lot. I think it is really, really good. But at the same time, I do think it gets, and it probably is one of the most, if not the most cinematic game I've played. But I do think it gets a little bit overhyped.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything like startlingly new or innovative about it that someone that hasn't read or watched the Walking Dead comic or show or played the Telltale Walking Dead game. I think one of those things, or if not all of them, touch upon a lot of these same kind of things in here. And what's really good about this game is the just the dialogue and the back and forth between Joel and Ellie, and how their relationship progresses over the course of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like, the setting, that darkness and misery and foreboding around, I don't think that's anything necessarily new. It does feel like sort of more like a movie, but at the same time, it's it's a video game, so you have to obviously it has to be like a lot of enemies for you to fight or get around or avoid.
Yeah.
And sometimes I normally don't say things like this, but it's like it almost seems like the combat in there takes away from it because you're murdering so many things. And it's like there's these nice moments here, and then you have to kill like 30 clickers or like a bunch of like scavenger guys or whatever, and it's like so much of that it reminds you like, oh, this is a game, this isn't a show. Okay. So, and a lot of the game is really just Joel and Ellie traveling through, and there are parts where you run into other characters and stuff like that, but usually it's like a one-off, and that's it, and then you murder them. So I'm really curious to see how the show adapts that.
Yeah.
So far, they seem to be doing a really good job of it. But the first 45 minutes or so of the game, you are interacting with a lot more characters than you do for the rest of the game.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm assuming based on what you just told me that cold open they have where it's like a talk show in like I think the 60s, that's not in the game at all, right?
No, it's not. It's not in the game, but that was a nice touch. I really thought that was kind of cool.
That was awesome. See, this is one of those parts where if I had done the notes, I would have that actor's name, but it's that guy that's in 4 Weddings and a Funeral, and he's also in the Mummy franchise, the Brendan Fraser Mummy movies.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Okay.
He's the guy that does that whole speech about fungi or like a fungus kind of taking over. And it's this great sequence. And one thing I really loved about that sequence was as he's describing this bleak stuff, there's actually 2 things I really like about it. I really like how the talk show host kind of like is mugging for the camera and for the audience when he's asking his questions and he's like interrupting people and making jokes. Yeah. I like that. I like how he starts to just freeze and stop mugging and just like focus on what the guy's saying. And I also liked how as the scientist is talking about people getting taken over by this fungus, we cut to people in the audience and they almost look like they're like androids or something. They're just kind of staring.
No, they're all stunned by like how disturbing it all sounds,
Right. But
losing your bodily autonomy, but kind of being aware of it is really frightening.
Yeah. And I know that like this concept, maybe it's original from the game, but I know that other things have used this concept too now at this point with the idea of like spores taking over. There's this one book that's about zombies called The Girl with All the Gifts, and it's by Mike Carey or M.R. Carey. They made it into a movie too, and I'm pretty sure that he has a similar concept where it's like a spore that takes over people's minds too. But I think he would have taken it from this game if he was inspired. I don't think it's the other way around. But one other thing I want to touch upon was that the beginning of the show, the part that you said you play as Joel's daughter, takes place in Austin, Texas in 2003.
Oh, no, that's not when you moved to Texas, was it?
No. I've lived here since 2009 for me living here. Okay. But I was going to say that it's a lot of fun watching a zombie apocalypse begin like in your hometown. Because I mean, we've had zombie apocalypses begin in New York too, right? Like we've seen that. But I've never seen one in Austin. And as they're going through the sequences, I see like, first you see this neighborhood that Joel lives in. Then when shit hits the fan, they're starting to drive, and then they kind of go into a city, and it looks like Austin, but I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be Austin. Like, you have been to Austin at one point or no?
Yeah.
Okay, do you remember 6th Street?
Yeah, I've been there. Yep.
Okay, and I think we probably should have said this too, but like spoilers for this first episode.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping I'm gonna tell you too, if you could refrain from spoiling the game for me, because I do like the idea of like going in fresh for this.
Of course, yeah. I'll do my best.
So anyway,
I already spoiled 2 things for you.
Well, yeah, you said there's a lot of murdering, but that's cool. But anyway, the 6th Street part, like there was a part where I was like, okay, well, is that supposed to be 6th Street? Because it didn't like look exactly like 6th Street, but it was set up like it, and there was a shit ton of people in it. So I was like, that has to be 6th Street, right? But I thought that was really well done. That sequence where like the zombies just start crashing through the buildings and coming out.
Yeah, no, it was good, but again, it's like it was good, and they do evoke that kind of emotion of terror and and ultimately tragedy for what happens, but it's not anything we haven't seen before,
Yeah. We had mentioned. I mean, I just mentioned like how we've seen apocalyptic movies in like New York, right? And there's a great sequence in the beginning of World War Z, right, where Brad Pitt's family is trying to get out of New York, and it always kind of has that same pattern, right, where it's like, you start to hear like things on the radio, like, oh, there's a weird occurrence here. And then like maybe you see some cop cars go by, then there's an explosion, then you see people starting to freak out. Right?
Yeah, that literally happens step by step in this pilot here.
Right. Is that what it's like in the game too?
Yeah, exactly like that. Yeah. I mean, there was even a lot of recreated shots, I would say too.
Tell me about some of those. I want to know like some of the recreated shots.
Well, I mean, the scene where with the car crash and the events that happen after it. So the car crash, Joel pulls Ellie out and he starts carrying her, and the scene with the shoulder, that was pretty much shot for shot the game. The scene with towards the end of the episode when they are when the soldier catches Joel and Tess and Ellie outside the quarantine zone, and they're scanning them. They go down the line, Tess, Joel, and then Ellie, and she takes her knife and stabs them because she doesn't want to get scanned at that point. So like those are pretty much shot for shot there.
Okay. So in the game, Joel is a smuggler?
Yes.
Okay, and so he like smuggles drugs and stuff?
Yeah, he smuggles stuff from outside the quarantine zone, essentially. I don't exactly remember if it was particularly drugs.
Yeah.
But it was just smuggling, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's so funny because there's such a leap from that Austin sequence in the beginning and then the post-apocalyptic world. I watched this show with my wife, and my wife is usually pretty critical of genre stuff. Like, she doesn't like genre stuff, and especially if it's like, oh, well, we've seen that before, which you kind of alluded to a couple of times. We've seen so much of this. But I have to say that my wife really, really loved that first half where it's like the pre-apocalypse.
Yeah.
She thought it was really well done, and she particularly liked how you follow Joel's daughter, and then like she dies, but you're so attached to her. And I think that actress. Have you seen her in anything else before?
I have not, but that is Tandy Newton's daughter.
Holy shit! Okay, that explains why she looked familiar. Okay, okay. So somebody else did the notes today. Jeez. She was so great. It like you said, it's very similar to the game. Does she kind of have that same kind of sequence, or like she goes to the neighbor's house and there's something freaky there? And
I don't think she goes to the neighbor. I think she hears things on the radio. She's in the house and she hears noises downstairs, and she goes downstairs where her dad's like loading up a gun, saying something's wrong with the neighbors. Okay. I don't think she actually. That was one of the things they kind of fleshed out. Like, she doesn't have that interaction with the neighbors at all.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of that too, I think this was said on the official like Last of Us HBO companion podcast, which is actually hosted by Troy Baker, who's the voice of Joel in the game.
That's cool.
And my wife told me this, that they left. They one of the producers or writers or creators said something like, "We left a trail of breadcrumbs for you to figure out how the apocalypse started," which they don't.
Okay.
Which they don't get into in the game. They don't tell you how or why it started, but you'll notice that they emphasize the word breadcrumbs, and you'll notice that several times in the episode, people avoided or insinuated that they don't eat bread or didn't eat something that contained flour. So essentially, I think they're implying that the outbreak was caused by contaminated flour.
Oh, holy shit! Okay.
Joel says that he's on the Atkins diet. They don't eat pancakes for breakfast. They don't eat a cake for Joel's birthday.
Wow.
I think there was something else. And when he says when Joel says he's on Atkins, it's because his neighbor offers them biscuit,
Right.
and you see the older lady who was the first person you see infected eat it, and also Ellie doesn't eat the cookies because they have raisins in them.
Wow. That just blew my mind, man. That is awesome.
So I don't know if they're gonna like really follow up on that in terms of the story, but like I'm actually like impressed by that.
I'm impressed.
Just throwing that in there.
Fuck yeah. I maybe you can confirm this for me. I'll have to look it up for next episode, but I'm pretty sure the people that made the show, the two showrunners, are from that show Chernobyl that was on HBO.
I don't know, and I haven't seen Chernobyl, so I'm not.
Yeah, Chernobyl is one of those things where it's just like every time I heard someone talking about it, they were always raving about how good it was, and you see all these memes and these gifs from it. I want to watch it eventually, especially if the people that made this show made it too. That's one concern that I always have when they adapt things. Like, if we're talking about post-apocalyptic zombie stories being adapted to a show, like you already mentioned, The Walking Dead. I felt like there was like unnecessary padding even within that first season of The Walking Dead, where what they added did not improve the story. It just made it feel like you were just kind of stretching things out. I haven't played the game, so I can't speak for that. But I was worried that maybe they were going to add things that were kind of like boring additions or like superfluous. But what was interesting to me is the world felt very like thought out and planned, and it felt more planned than I thought a video game would be, because like I think there's certain video game worlds, like one of your favorites, Mass Effect, where it's like very clear that they like spent a ton of time planning the world out. But I think so much of a video game is an experience, and they're much more concerned about experience than like world building. But I thought that the world building of this was really well done. Is it like that in the game too?
The world building is very very well done, I'd say. And I also do think that there's a lot more games that go like all in on that world building than you'd expect.
Yeah,
there are tons of games and tons of that just like pile on the lore.
Is that like Fallout game a good example?
Yeah, Fallout's a great example.
Yeah. What I was gonna say is that when we cut to the future, they have this one scene that you almost kind of forget about, because first of all, I watched it in two segments, right? Me and my wife watched like an hour, and then we watched like the other like half the next night. But we saw this one sequence where this little boy comes walking in, and they scan him, and I don't really think you see like clearly right in your face. Like no one holds up that little scanner and says like he's infected.
No, it's red. It shows a red screen.
Right. But it's so subtly done that like it's like behind the kid's back, and the other person's just going like, here's the thing. And then they give the kid an injection, and you don't see anything. Like the kid doesn't die, but the implication is that they killed the kid, right?
You do actually see. You actually see Joel throw the body in the fire. So yeah, you don't see the kid's face, but the shirt and the pants are the same. And I think what's really like the best part about that scene is that they, those soldiers, they see that red diagnosis. They say like, oh, everything's gonna be great. We're gonna give you all this candy and these toys, and everything's gonna be great and fine. And they give them the shot, and they feel all better. And then the next thing you see is, the body in the back of a truck, and then it gets burned in a big fire.
Yeah. Oh man. So just so I got my world building correct, it's essentially that everyone lives within like the QZ, which I'm assuming stands for quarantine zone. It's behind a wall. The military runs everything, and there are forces. There's the Fireflies, who are essentially like rebels that think that I guess the military is too evasive or too powerful, and I guess the idea is that I'm sorry, was that
Too restrictive.
too restrictive? And I think that the game it came out after the Firefly show, right?
You mean like sci-fi Joss Whedon
Joss
Firefly?
Whedon, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, are they called fireflies because they blow things up, or they're not?
I don't know if they ever really explained why they were called fireflies. I can look that up for next time. I don't remember.
Yeah, because it's not like a little thing where they're like, we were inspired by this show that was on Fox, right?
Yeah, I don't think so, but I wouldn't be surprised either at the same time.
Right, because I mean, the Firefly, the show, is about rebels against like an oppressive kind of militaristic, empire kind of thing.
But also, I believe didn't Firefly come out in 2005?
Oh, so in the game, it's this.
Which would
It's
be
the same.
after the outbreak.
Okay, so in the game, it's 2003 too for the outbreak.
I want to. You know what? I'm not sure when it is, but I believe it is a 20-year time jump.
Yeah, I was actually shocked at like how far it jumped ahead. I was like, oh shit, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So tell me, what do you think about the performances from the actors? Because you know these characters, you've lived with these characters. What do you think about their?
Everything is pretty great. Everyone's spot on. I really like everybody so far. I mean, the main emphasis, as I mentioned, is on Joel and Ellie and their relationship back and forth. As you can tell, starting off, they're kind of like a little prickly towards each other. They're not really even trusting of each other. And you'll see that change over time there. Joel's very closed off because he doesn't want to be attached to someone that reminds him of his daughter. And Ellie is just, she's a kid in this ridiculously, dystopian world. And then she's been through a lot of things too. So she's not very trusting either.
Okay. What about Anna Torv and her character?
Yeah, Tess was pretty spot on. I mean, I'm a big fan of Anna Torv, although I guess I really only know her from Fringe.
Right.
God, I love Fringe, but I think she's doing a great job too. And as we mentioned before, like Marlene or Marlena, I forget which one it is.
Marlene, they said on the show.
Marlene, yeah. Like, really does look exactly like the game character. Now I'm thinking about it.
That's awesome. You know me, and I hate like exposition dumps. I do feel like they did kind of explain things a little bit, like it's like, oh well, we're doing this because of this, especially like the Firefly people. But everything did seem natural, and I didn't feel like they were holding the audience's hand to explain this new world. It was very much like we're in this world. You kind of have to put two and two together to understand the whole thing. And I liked that it was like this fleshed out world that was already established,
Yeah.
What do you call it? How many episodes is it supposed to be altogether?
I'm not sure. I would imagine there's probably something in the 8 to 10 range.
Okay. And is there only 2 games?
There's only 2 games, yes.
Okay.
So the original game came out in 2013. They remastered it in 2015, 2016, something like that for PS4. Then there was The Last of Us 2, which I actually have not played. And then they're actually remaking one for PS5, which should come out this year or next year. I'm not sure.
Okay, cool. Do you have any complaints about the show at all?
I mean, I've kind of said it. It's just like I do think it's a little bit overhyped. As I mentioned, I do think it's really well done. I think both the game and the show is getting a little overhyped.
Okay.
It's a really great game. It is really cinematic, but I don't think it's like the greatest thing I've ever seen or played or anything like that. It is really good, top of the line stuff though. Mm-hmm. And same thing with the show. Like we've seen, like we've read zombie comics, we've seen tons of zombie movies, we've watched at least part of The Walking Dead or read the comics, and I think in terms of the tale they're trying to tell here, I didn't realize I said that, but
sounds good.
No. But I'm saying is that the kind of relationship thing with the father and a surrogate daughter, they also do that in the first Telltale Walking Dead game.
Oh, okay.
And I think honestly that did it better than The Last of Us.
Okay.
Like I remember, like going through that game was was more emotionally impactful to me than playing through The Last of Us.
Whoa. Okay.
Although I mean that game was really based more on story and just choices rather than like action or anything like that. And this is more of a Last of Us is more of an action oriented game.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I know those Telltale games are more like you're just sort of making choices every so often, but it's like more like you're just watching a movie almost.
Yeah, it's like an interactive book or story more so. I mean, you do a couple things here and there,
Yeah.
but I mean, like you could argue that Last of Us is actually a stealth game.
Yeah. Well, for me, I'm a big HBO fan, and like so much of my time that I watch shows with my wife, or I watch shows for our channels, are because we're watching HBO things. HBO kind of always uses the same kind of crop of actors. They often use the same directors for their projects. The opening credits, they must use like the same studio that does like the opening credits for like Westworld and Game of Thrones. For HBO, they really do get some excellent actors. And as I saw the upcoming, like in the weeks to come, part of the very end of the episode, I saw that Melanie Linsky is going to be in the show for like maybe a brief moment. What's his face? Fucking the guy from Parks and Rec. And
oh my God, it's Ron Swanson, Nick Offerman.
Nick, thank you so much, Nick Offerman. And he was talking to a man they showed. Sherry and I just watched the first season of The White Lotus, which we really loved. And the guy who's like the host of The White Lotus is this New Zealand guy named Armand. If I had done notes, I would know the actor's name, but he was fantastic on that show. Looks like him and Nick Offerman are like in it together later in the show. Pedro Pascal is just like living his fucking best life right now, right?
Yeah.
Having this and The Mandalorian. So I mean, when I think of Pedro Pascal, and I think, okay, so I've seen him on Game of Thrones at this point, The Mandalorian, and Kingsman 2, whatever the fuck that's called, like the Drug Queen or whatever it's called.
Circle.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's the bland regular title. And I don't mean to shit on Kingsman 2. It's just I love Kingsman so much, and Kingsman 2 I think is kind of
was so much better than Kingsman 2, and Kingsman 1 is so much better than the comic. Like it's one of those rare things where like they really did improve upon it with the movie.
Right, exactly. Kind of like I feel like The Boys, but you and I kind of disagree about that sometimes too.
Yeah, The Boys has up and down. This one, like to me, it's like it's clearly 100% no. Like there's no argument to make.
Right. Well, I bring up Kingsman 2 because Pedro Pascal's in that, and like he's sort of this over the top. I mean, spoilers for that, but he's like a hero, but he turns out to be a traitor. But I think in everything he's good, and he really does a fantastic job being this like single dad at the beginning of the show. And when his daughter dies, he certainly conveys it. It's very upsetting. I'm looking forward to seeing him, but and please don't spoil this for me. I know you won't, but like, assuming that he's on the Mandalorian, I'm guessing that his character, might potentially die at some point.
I mean, he's not really on the Mandalorian all as much as you think. I mean, how often does he take his mask off? I mean, how often do you think he's actually in the suit when they're filming Mandalorian?
Okay, so I actually think about that sometimes because they've claimed that he is in that armor all the time, but I always kind of think of it as like, oh, is it just like Doom Patrol where it's like Brendan Fraser and the other guy? And
there's somebody else that like his stunt double or whatever. Like I read articles about how the stunt double like mimics his walk or practices his walk so it looks like you can't tell. And I remember, and Pedro Pascal has said that Disney gave him a lot of freedom to work on other things. I mean, it is kind of crazy that this show and Mandalorian season 3 had to have been filmed at the same time, basically.
Wow.
At some point,
Yeah. And you and I are going to cover Mandalorian season 3 when it comes on too. And
we're just going to have a whole quarter year about Pedro Pascal.
Yeah, too bad he's not going to be an Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania.
Yeah, well, maybe he'll show up in something else by the end of the year.
Yeah, maybe. Cool. Well, do you have anything else you want to say about The Last of Us, the first episode?
No, but I'm looking forward to watching the rest.
Yeah, I'm really, really glad that you recommended that we cover this because I really enjoyed that first episode. I feel the same as you where it's like, okay, we've seen a lot of this, but I think it was very well done. And as far as video game adaptations go, I think it was like one of the better ones.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's a tough market for video games. There aren't too many things that are starting off as a game and turn into something well made, movie wise or anything. So it's definitely in high regards, but that bar is not that high.
Exactly. Yeah. Mortal Kombat Annihilation is a little bit lower than this, right? So
I mean, one of the few things I would think of would be like Castlevania. The Castlevania anime was like pretty damn good.
oh yeah. I know that sometimes, yeah. The cartoon adaptations can be real good. Yeah. Even some of the movie ones too. But yeah. So if you guys are new to Comic Books Transformed, Brian and I make videos once a week. Sometimes the day rotates. I think for this one, we're going to be recording on Thursdays. The video will go up on Friday mornings. So you can get a new video every Friday morning. But make sure you guys subscribe. And please tell us if you're a fan of the game, if you're a fan of the show, if you're a fan of Pedro Pascal when he's not in armor. And we will see you guys next Friday. Thank you.